Hey guys, welcome to Algos Explained. I'm David Kim, and today we're going to go over another JavaScript question from Code Wars. Code Wars is a platform where you can just solve algorithm questions in multiple languages, and you can check your answer right then and there. Just a disclaimer, it's kind of hot today in California, and so my windows are open. So, from my experience, you guys don't hear anything that goes on outside, but if you do, and I don't edit it out, then just that's what happened. If there's like barking or cars honking or whatnot, hopefully none of that happens, but you never know. And so here we go. This question that we're going to do in JavaScript today is called formatting a number as price. Pretty much, we're going to be given a number and we got to make it look like kind of what it would look like in currency. And so let's go ahead and read this question, and then we'll walk over kind of our game plan, and then walk over this code over here. And I split it up, as you can see right here. I split it up into extra functions, and I'll give a pause at each one, so that maybe if you want to just pause it and take a look at it for yourself, rather than hearing me explain it, feel free to do that. So your objective, I'm just reading right here. Your objective is to add formatting to a plain number to display it as price. The function should return a string like this. And so for one, you already know that you're going to be given a number, but a type number, but you're going to be outputting a type string. And that does make sense because you're going to have to put a period in there. You're going to have to put a comma in there. So of course, it's not going to stay as like a number. And so let's see, numbers should use the standard comma for every three numbers and a dot to separate the cents. Cents need to be truncated to two decimals. In the case that the decimal part of the number is one character long or none, you should add zero so that the result will always have two decimal characters. The function will also evaluate negative numbers. Function should return not a number, and we can see that that's a string if the input is not a valid number. And so you might think, okay, first of all, when I had a question, I was returning not a number as a not a number, not it as a string. And so I missed that at first, and it was an easy fix, just outputting as a string. Another thing that we needed to focus is when we truncate the decimal points, say you have multiple decimals like this example down here in the sample test. You have a 129, and you might think, okay, do they want us to round it up to a 13 cent? And that is not the case. We literally just want to chop it off to be kind of two decimals only if it already had a decimal point to begin with. And so let's go ahead and when I first started this, I thought, okay, the easiest thing to do right now is take care of this not a number case. Kind of like, you know, when you're running through questions and there's like low hanging fruit, I like to do those first because oftentimes, yeah, why not? It's just like how when you're doing like a recursion problem, you're gonna more or less want to do like the base cases first. For these little things, I like to take care of like these one-off error cases almost right away. And so I did that over here by saying type of number. So we're checking what the number is right over here. That's the parameter, the argument that we're going to get. And we're going to check the type of, and if it's not a number, then we're going to return none. And I could have done return type of number and expected it to output non, but non, which stands for not a number. But then that wouldn't be in string form and therefore not really equal to what they were checking for us. And so I had to output a string myself and not just kind of try to return type of number. Yeah. And of course, if it was a letter or something like that, then that wouldn't have worked either because then it would have given like a string or something. And we do want non all the time as long as it's not a number. It doesn't matter if it's a letter or a symbol or whatnot. If it's not a number, we want this. And I couldn't have done parse int. I know when you do parse int and the argument you put in something that's not a number, you will get non. But again, that is not going to output that in string format, so I had to return non. Anyways, that's too much on this thing right here. Um, so there's kind of like if you look at this problem, there's two things that we need to take care of. We need to take care of the decimals and how that's formatted, and we need to take care of the commas. And so that is exactly how I split this case up. I created two helper functions. So this was my main function here that they're gonna run. I created two helper functions used on line 8 and 9, and they're right here: inject period and inject comma. So I'll rest there for a second if you want to pause that and look at that. And inject comma is a little longer. Let me get rid of that. Yeah, I'll pause that for a second. And we're going to run through those. We're going to walk through those with an example and kind of see how it's constructed, why I constructed it my way. And of course, if you look at these answers later on after you solve this one, there are definitely shorter answers, but this is just kind of, I feel like, very easy to understand. And yeah, just how I did it at first. And so first I wanted to tackle the period because that just seemed easier. It was pretty well explained. There were pretty much three cases. Maybe there were too many decimals, there were no decimals, or there was too little decimals. And so my inject period takes care of all of those. But before I go into that, you have to understand that sometimes the decimal, the period, pretty much the period, sometimes it comes with it, sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, your inject period helper function would have to put it in there itself, or with zeros, or it would have to or your function or your function would have to work with the one that's already in there and kind of determine at that point, does it have too many or does it have too little, um, despite having the period in there or not. And so what I did here on line 6 was I took this the number pretty much, and I did number.toString, and I changed it to a string early on because I knew that we're going to be working with strings this whole time, or for the rest of this whole method, because our output is going to be strings. We're going to be adding periods to it. We're going to be adding commas to it. So why not just change it to a string right now? And once I did change it to a string, I was able to split it with a period. And so what would happen there is string array would now be an array with pretty much two elements in it if it had a period in it. If it didn't have two elements in it, it would just have it would just be an array of just one element, which would be just a number. So pretty much if it had something like a 5 given, then my string array would have at the index of 0 the 5 or the negative 5, and at the index of 1 there would just be nothing in there. So if I would tap into that, I would get undefined. And with that, let's go into my inject period helper function. Inject period takes in a string number, assuming that it gets something, right? If I was given an argument like that, I would be given the 129. The period does not come with it because when you split it, the array gets created without that split element. And so if I split an example like this, I would get 129 in here as a string form. And if I split this one over here on line 3, the test samples, I would get the 5. And if I split something like this, I would get undefined because you would be tapping into that section of the string array, and it didn't get split. There was no period to split it with, and so it would be undefined. And so we take care of that first. If string number is undefined or is nothing, then you just return 2 zeros. And at first I didn't have this, so or equals just an empty string, but I had to because sometimes, I imagined the fact, or I imagined a scenario where maybe they would put a period but add no numbers, and that would successfully split it, and string array would have the length of 2. It would have the numbers on one at the index of 0, and it would have an empty string at the index of 1, therefore not being undefined yet still needing to be within this case. And so what would happen is I checked for both undefined, and if it was nothing, and I would have to return decimal 00. And so the next case is maybe it has a decimal and it had a number in it, but not enough. Say it was just one number, like this case. Then you have to add the 0 to it, and so pretty much it just checks for exactly that string number. If that is exactly equal to 1, pretty much what we do is we add the period, because of course during the split the period got lost, and we put that number in there. There was only one number. We put that number and we put a 0 in there. And so this would successfully be 50 cents, because that's pretty much what that's representing. You're not going to try to put the 0 in front of the 5 because that would change things. And lastly, if they had the decimal again, and if they had too many decimals after, if they had the period and they had too much decimals after, what would happen is we pretty much just take the first two. Again, looking from this example here, we are not rounding it up, so we don't have to worry about that. All we have to do is slice it, And I think we're gonna use slice a couple more times in this whole problem. So just to give you a quick reminder, that first number is inclusive, meaning if you have an array and you slice it, or if you have a string and you slice it, slice can be used both on arrays and strings. The first number is inclusive, meaning it will include whatever that zero index or that first index. And the second number is exclusive, meaning whatever that second whatever is here, whatever index that points to, that number will not be included. So in the string.slice, I would be getting the numbers at the index of 0 and 1, and by 2, that's kind of what I'm slicing away. And of course, I add that period in there again and return that. So inject period, that takes care of all those solutions. If I didn't want to have that period, this period, or this period in here, I could have added the period over here. But instead of doing that, I wanted to make this as clean as possible, and so I decided, okay, I'm just going to have the inject period take care of actually injecting the period, because that's kind of what that sounds like, right? And so, okay, there we go. Inject period does what we want it to do. And let's see, now we're going to have to inject commas. And so pretty much, just like what the function name implies, we're injecting the commas inside the kind of number that we had before the decimal points. If we didn't have a decimal point, that's the entire number. And so let's go down here and take a look at this. We're given a string num as an argument, so we're going to be expecting a string, and this might or might not have that negative sign at the very front, and we need to keep that in mind. At first, I didn't keep that in mind, so I started failing a lot of tests, but I had to, in the end, I figured it out. So count is equal to the length, and comma count is equal to 0, and I'll explain that later. When I first tried to do this, I was first trying to do it with like a for loop or whatnot. At first I was trying to do a for loop and kind of skip it by threes and then inject the comma into like a new string or whatnot, but I felt like, it wasn't really working out, and this while loop instead was a lot easier for me to kind of do it simply and make it into a way where it's easier to explain. And so pretty much what is happening here is we have a counter, and the counter is getting subtracted, and that count is starting at the end. And so pretty much we are walking backwards. And the good thing about that is, well, that's kind of how you make your commas anyways. If your number was too long for you to kind of see the end and the beginning at the same time, how would you put the comma? You would start at the back of the number, not at the front of the number. And so what we did was we are walking back just like how we would do it in real life, and we need to keep track of every three numbers we see. And at first I was trying to have count do that for me, but again, that was getting complicated, and it was probably possible, but it was not worth the effort. And so I decided to create a comma count, which would not reset, but rather at every three it would be divisible by 3. And so at that point I would know, okay, 3 numbers have passed, I'm going to inject a comma in there, given a couple of other scenarios align. And so what are those other scenarios? Let's take a look. It's all in this if statement. But before we get into that condition, I just want to go here real quick because it's shorter. What's going to happen is we're going to take the string num and slice it. And we are adding the comma in there. So again, we're walking backwards, right? So we're going to have to slice it pretty much the last 3 or the last 3 we saw, and then everything else in the front. And so pretty much you string num.slice from 0, which is the front, to the count, whatever count you are on, and you add that comma, and you then add whatever was in the back. So at first, when you're counting your first 3, your num.slice 0 to count is going to have everything but the last 3 numbers. You're going to put that comma in there, and then you're going to put back on the last 3 numbers here. The good thing about going backwards like that is that you're not going to mess up the index that count is representing. And so when you do string num.slice at count, now that is still the right one when you're counting 3 numbers. We know that the comma adding the comma in there does kind of shift the the indexes of all these numbers that happens to go behind the comma, but we're no longer dealing with that, so that's totally okay. And so once we go to our next set, like once we do these three, we would inject that comma in there. And now once we do these three, by the time we put in our comma over here right after the 1, and I'm looking at the test samples down here, it wouldn't matter what kind of indexes these hold because indexes start from the front starting at 0 anyways. And so that's kind of, and we make that equal back to string num so that we can constantly just inject in there and at the end return it. Before we exit out of the while loop, we increment the comma count and we decrement the count. And again, the comma count is just making sure every 3 numbers we get that comma in there. The count is making sure that we actually end this while loop at some point. And it starts at the length of the string num, and it will go all the way to when the count is 0. And so a couple of things that we need to focus on is, or let's just take a look at all of these conditions. Comma count mod 3 is equal to 0. What that means right there is that comma count is checking for whether it is divisible by 3 or not. And if it is, then mod would be 0, and you know that 3 passed. And so once you get to 6, then you know, okay, right after 6 you also need a comma, and it's the same case. It's divisible by 3. The comma count mod 3 would equal to 0, and so okay, you know, okay, this does qualify to put that comma in there. We also need to know that comma count cannot equal 0 simply because we don't want it to start at the very first. Pretty much, comma count starts at 0, right? And so if we comma 0 mod 3 would equal that, and so we need to make sure, okay, we stop it right there in its tracks. We don't want a number to have a comma right at the beginning right there. We want it to be after that first 3 we count. And so the next one we check here is we count does not equal 0, because that would mean, hey, we're at the very beginning of the number, and that doesn't make sense either. This over here, this is kind of what I worked with for a little bit because I wasn't getting the right solutions. What I did here was parse in string num count -1. Pretty much this was because my negatives were giving me a problem. I would have a number, maybe like a 6-digit number, and I was getting the 3 commas right after that first 3, but I was also getting a comma right after that negative sign because it didn't count that it couldn't catch that negative sign wasn't actually a number. It thought it was a number, and so of course, given a six-digit number, if it has a negative sign, that would be length 7, and so that number would have 2 commas in it, right? But in reality, it doesn't need that. Doesn't need that comma that follows that negative sign because that's not a number. And so I would have to check. Okay, um, is that element right there at that position, is that actually a number or not? And so what I would do was parse int this, and I think like I mentioned when I first started this video, when you do parse int something that's not a number, you'll get not a number. You don't have to do typeof at that point. You could just check whether it's a number or not. And although I knew that I would only be working with negative signs and I could maybe check directly there, I didn't want to take the chance. And although now that I think about it, I could have just done that. It's silly not to. But anyways, what I did was I parsed into this, and I two-stringed it because not a number is not equal to not a number. You could even do parse int like something random, and you'll get not a number, and you could say is that equal to, and then do that exact same thing again, and it would be false because not a number cannot be equal to not a number. But luckily, if you change that not a number return to a string, you could then check with it to see if it cancels out with the string version of not a number or not. And so this is to check the negative signs. If the negative sign is not a number, pretty much, if it's not a number, then we would go into here. And so that is that. Injecting commas. Let's see. I'm trying to think if I need to go over anything else. Let me prove it to you guys that it works. Run sample tests, and boom, it checks it all out. So something like yeah. I don't know. At this point, I don't think there would be any more questions, but I could have missed something. So hey, if you have anything else that you want me to answer, go ahead and comment it in the comments, and I try to get to you guys within a day or so. Especially if it's these algorithm questions. Going back to it always helps me out too. And so yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. Unfortunately, I'm not consistent right now, and especially this weekend, I'll be out. I'm going camping, so hopefully that all goes well. But I really appreciate you guys watching my videos and watching my playlist. Hopefully, I'm really hoping that it's helping you guys out as much as as much as it is fun for me and helping me out sharpening my algorithm skills. Getting tongue twisted today, sorry about that. But anyways, I hope you guys have a good one, and I'll catch you in the next one.